Expend4bles, or Expend4bles as it's known on the poster, is directed by Scott Wall. It stars Jason Statham, Sylvester Stallone, and among others. And this is the fourth film in the Expendables franchise. And this story, it deals with the Expendables having to take down Iko Uwais, I'm sorry for getting his name right, his plan to basically cause nuclear destruction. And along the way, it also kind of becomes a personal story as well for one of the main characters. Now, here's a little backstory. Now, the movie is the fourth film in the Expendables franchise, and I got to admit that, when I first announced years ago when the first Expendables was going to come out from Sylvester Stallone, basically bringing back the 80s and 90s action feel of bringing all these legends together, I was so hyped with this franchise, back in 2010, to where seeing all the big name legends like Arnold, Stallone, Bruce Willis, and all them to get them together, like, it was such a dream come true. And I really did enjoy the first one a lot. And even though I had some issues, maybe some here and there, as far as them trying to find the right tone, I still really enjoyed it. And I thought it was even more better with the director's cut that Stallone did, that extended a lot of scenes and stuff. And then when the second one came out, it got me even more pumped because it was, bringing in more stars in Hollywood and action legends that I haven't seen, that I've always wanted to see, come together and stuff, especially Chuck Norris and Jean-Claude Van Damme and all them. And so the second one I thought was even better than the first one, and it still holds as my favorite of the franchise. But it seems like over the years that between 2 and 3 that they were trying to really, build more and stuff. But it seemed like when they got to the third one, they kind of found where Stallone wanted to go into a different direction with trying to bring more of a newer crowd, so to speak, while also trying to, still keep the vibe of the old school action films with the other characters as well. And I remember when the third one came out, I was pretty disappointed with it. And even though I do own it, and they did make a longer, unrated version, I still felt like it was one of those films that it is not a good action film. And the only reason I still really watch it is just for the old cast, because with them bringing in the younger cast members, there were a lot of younger new members that I just didn't really care for, other than maybe Ronda Rousey, in the action department and stuff, and maybe maybe somebody else. But I remember just not really caring too much for the younger cast, and the only thing that really held that movie together the most was seeing the old crew again, and also seeing Mel Gibson as the villain. But after the disappointment of the third film, it seemed like Stallone wanted to go back to basics with trying to make it more R-rated, and given the vibe that unfortunately the third film didn't do. And over the years, it seems like they took a long hiatus, because this is a film that was in development for a while, and then basically kept having longer delays and stuff. And with it being now 9 years since the last film, I really did kind of wonder how this was going to turn out. And my expectations were still optimum, because I still wanted to see, the old cast and coming back, and also adding a couple of new characters, a couple of new crew members that really got my attention, especially Tony Jaa and the guy from the Raid, Iko. And seeing those guys, coming together as part of the old crew and stuff was great. But then when I started seeing the reviews for it and everything, and also some of the trailers, I could kind of get the vibe that it seemed like there was something kind of missing, and on top of that, it doesn't have quite as big as a big cast like I thought going into the other films. And after upon seeing the film, I can honestly say that, well, it is definitely a letdown for me. I had the same problems with this like I did with the third one, but in some regards, there's things in this that I kind of found a little worse than the third one. And even though I didn't care too much for the third one, this one unfortunately had more of a mistakes, because it was trying to go back to basics like the other films. And so, to get my pros out of the way, that I'll say, I thought the cast in this, for the old crew, I thought really worked. Statham, Randy Couture, Dolph Lundgren, and Stallone. They all still shine in the roles in what they're given. And being able to still maintain that old school kind of vibe with their characters and stuff, throwing one-liner stuff, you could definitely tell that these guys really wanted to put so much into making a fun action film, and I commend them for it. It's not their fault that this script and this direction they took for it was a very big, shame to not really give them their full potential. Because there are moments where there is some really fun humor that's throughout the movie, and especially the chemistry that's still there with Stallone and Statham still works. And then also seeing the villain Iko really get to showcase a lot of his brutality in this, I thought was a nice surprise. in some ways compared to some of the stuff that the other villains did in the other ones. But, well, and also I also say too is that there is some interesting stuff that goes down where they try to do something a little different this time, where it becomes a more personal stakes. But I do have a pro-con with that because it gets into some stuff later that I'll get into some spoilers with. Because it also was starting to remind me of another film that it unfortunately basically rehashed. And so there was that. And then on top of that, Andy Garcia was a nice addition. He was saying certain lines that were kind of funny here and there. And Tony Jaa was a big surprise too, with him, aiding Statham along his journey, along with the crew and stuff. And so he was great. And then some of the fight scenes, they were interesting with how they were able to play out on certain scenes. But that is also kind of a con I'll get into later, because similar problems like I had with some of the other films, unfortunately some of the cam work really takes away the focus of what you're really trying to keep up with as far as the action scenes. And, there's some fun gore that's throughout the film and a couple of set pieces that do work, especially this bike chase scene that happens in the third act, where Statham is on this motorbike and stuff like that has guns. I thought that was a nice addition. And then there's some other stuff where you see bodies exploding and stuff and gore here throughout. That's nice to see when it's done right, because that is another problem with it being pretty CGI with blood, like they did with the other films. But this one was a lot more open, and you could tell that it wasn't quite as rendered like they were going with. And that's a really big issue I have with. I'll get into my cons. And so that's as far as it goes, as far as my pros I have, because now that I get into my cons, I got to say that from the beginning it seemed like it was kind of in trouble, because the first time that we get introduced into the Expendables, it's actually starting already in the midpoint. And to get into some of my spoilers, and this will be a spoiler-filled discussion, the movie actually opens differently than what I expected, where you have pretty much the villain, in his perspective, Eco, having to go to this one area in, I think it was in Libya, yeah, where he's trying to take down this, trying to go after this general, I think. And while it is interesting to see him playing a villain in this and being able to showcase his brutality, because he does actually do some stuff that I didn't find really expecting, especially part where he has a child, and he's, having a child basically killed right in front of the general. That really threw me off, but in a good way. But then the problem that it gets into is the fact that we go from a scene where it's focusing on him before he even gets to the general. It basically, when he's invading the whole area and stuff, it literally cuts to the current it currently cuts to Louisiana, where we pick up with the Expendables crew. And I have a problem with this editing, because after that we spin the introduction to where you get Stallone's character coming back and trying to recruit Statham, and they get into a mishap that happens where where Barney's trying to get his ring back and stuff, and they have this bar fight that happens. And after the introduction that we get with Stallone and Statham, it literally cuts back to the action scene that we had earlier with Eco. And I really did kind of question the budget in this, because with it going with that kind of editing, that really threw me off, because it was almost like they bookended. It's like they split the whole action scene into a weird chapter like that. And I don't think that really doesn't work in a movie like this. And it just really fell off, because as soon as they leave the bar and stuff, it literally resumes the scene where he's going after the Eco is going after the general. And I was kind of questioning, like, okay, why did you just split that whole action scene with it out of here? If you wanted to start it right, if I was editing the movie, I would have started the whole action sequence with the villain, and then after that you cut to the introduction to Stallone and Statham and everything else, because then after that they go on their mission. And also, this is another problem I have with the movie too, is when it gets into its first action scene, already from the beginning, we're showing that it's actually shown on a green screen. And I have a really big issue with this, because throughout most of the film, you're seeing them literally on a green screen going through different areas. And it looks really jarring and really bad, like a really bad sci-fi channel, and not in a good way. I know this was meant to be kind of more in that throwback to, action films and stuff like they were going for. But even the other film, especially the first one, they were in real locations and stuff like that. And they did use CGI blood, but this is way too much to where it kept taking me out of the film, where I was trying to focus on some fun action, but every time I keep seeing that green screen, I was just sitting here just in so much really in so much agony and so much disappointment seeing my, some of my favorite action heroes doing stuff that looks really out of place. And I understand that green screen can be used in certain areas as long as it's rendered right, but this is really too obvious to where you know where it's at. And then even with that being said, we're also introduced to some new crew members that I really didn't care for, especially with basically we have the son of Antonio Banderas' character from the third film, and I thought he was annoying as fuck and didn't really add much to the movie. And then you have 50 Cent coming in, who I am hit and miss on some movies that he's done, but here, I mean, he's really, kind of there and doesn't really do much. He just is kind of basically there to pretty much, I guess, replace Terry Crews, because unfortunately Terry Crews couldn't come into the movie due to some things that happened behind the scenes. And so, but I've just never really been too big of a fan of 50 Cent's acting. And with this one, he just doesn't really, I just really didn't think that he really added much to the franchise. And same thing with Megan Fox. I thought with her too, she really fell out of place, where I'm supposed to buy that she's an action star and stuff, but I've seen Megan Fox do better in other films, especially Jennifer's Body and stuff like that. But with this, her trying to be an action kind of lead, it doesn't work. And her chemistry with Statham, I just didn't really get into that much. And so there was that. And then also, when we get into some other stuff that goes down in the film, I felt like it was really trying to get into some stuff that I really didn't care for, because the movie is very simple to where after the beginning goes down when they're trying to go after the villain, it literally becomes pretty much a rehash of the third film, where unlike the third film where you had Terry Crews basically, taking a back seat after he gets injured, this one it pretty much takes it to where Stallone's character is basically exit after the first 10 or so 50 minutes, where he's basically blown up in a helicopter. And I mean, I could see what they were trying to do with this, because they saw the problems of the third film, but I have a con with that later I'll get into. But basically the mission goes into where they have to avenge Barney from dying, and while this can raise some stakes, unfortunately the problem is that you're having it to where Statham is basically lifted from the Expend4bles after Andy Garcia essentially kicks him off the team, and then it's focusing on them going after the villain. And then after that, it almost seems like, this becomes more of a Jason Statham movie, because even the Expend4bles themselves, when they get to the actual boat that the villain's on and stuff, they actually get captured for about midway through the film, and where they're basically held captive, and then it's up to Statham and having to go after them with Tony Jaa. And, one of the problems I have with this is that the way that the movie is not very on that epic kind of scale, it comes across as very cheap looking, where you see them pretty much going through a lot of green screen, and then when they get to about the midway point, it's mostly taking place on this boat, and it feels very like I'm watching a straight-to-video film, and it doesn't look great at all. But then even with that being said, though, when we get into the stuff later with the climax, it did start to pick up a little bit, but it still was also giving me, it was going on a roller coaster where it's like, okay, you have some fun action here and there, but then it starts getting to the same bullshit that we saw earlier with the green screen. And on top of that, this is another thing I have an issue with. The humor can be really forced and very bad in this at times, where it does not come across as either funny. It comes across as very cheap humor that where they throw a dick joke in a lot, and they also kind of recycle a lot of the same jokes that we had in the first film, especially with the stuff involving with, and they pull this off several times, or a couple times with Randy Couture's ears. They have the same exact speech that he gives about how he lost it and stuff like that, and I just didn't really, I was just really just like, okay, can we please move on? And then when we get into a lot of stuff later where it's having to go down in this climax, granted, the fight scene that happens with the characters actually, having Tony Jaa, fight and stuff, and then you also have Eco going against Jason Statham. It is a good fight, especially where you get to see a little bit of vulnerability with Jason Statham. But I felt like with the camera work in this, they really fucked up on trying to make it, very clear a lot of times, because even though you do see more gore in this, you do also see a lot of stuff where it's unfocused on looking at a lot of action parts where I could tell what was happening, but then other parts I was just like, okay, why did they really, move the camera back and forth with it being very frenetic like that? I think that it was very, out of play. It was very too much, and it was the same problem I had with the third film, and also part of the first movie. Now it just seems like that's always been a problem I've had with the other films. But at least 1 and 2, they were able to still blend it very well, where you could still see what was happening for the most part. But here, they should have learned by now that action films like this, especially in the John Wick movies and stuff, they've actually relied more on seeing a lot of wide shots and a lot of stuff that uses practical effects. And it's really sad that franchise and even the Equalizer films were able to still do and capture the old school vibes. Then it also gets into later to the climax that feels really bad when it comes to a reveal that the villain that's basically behind all this is actually Andy Garcia. And I knew that from the beginning because, well, if you've seen a lot of films in the past, I've seen movies where Andy Garcia has played the bad guy, and he just kind of seemed like, in the way that he's kind of coming across as very kind of suspicious, especially in one part, I kind of knew that he would turn, and so that really didn't surprise me the way that it's revealed with that. And so we get into this reveal where he's basically behind everything, and then, granted, there is an unintentional funny scene that happens where he's trying to take down Statham and stuff with his men, and then some shit goes down where it's just him and Statham face to face, and then all of a sudden Stallone comes in and he ends up shooting the shit out of Andy Garcia, which I thought was pretty unintentionally hilarious, the way the CGI was rendered and stuff. So there are a couple laughs here and there with the CGI. The fact that they brought in Stallone at the end of it, and it was like his death seemed very meaningless, and it was like they were rehashing the third film with Terry Crews basically being out and then having to get revenge and stuff. It was like, why do we keep having this same thing where you are faking out your main characters? I think if they really had the balls to really go with that approach, maybe it could have had more of an impact, maybe. And if it had a better script in mind where you get to do more with your villain and stuff and had a better overall movie, it probably could work. And if you wanted to go in a more way where if you were doing a whole passing the torch with Statham, it probably could have worked a lot better had you not had it to where you're going with that whole fake out, because it seems like only Expend4bles 2 actually did that right, where they killed off a crew member and then they were able to get revenge and stuff. But it seems like they keep treading that water where they're too afraid to do high risks, and going all out and stuff like that. But then it pretty much has it to where things are settled and they end up pretty much defeating the bad guys and then going back and then celebrating, and we're now having it to where Megan Fox and this other girl that I forgot to mention has joined the team, that Asian girl. And out of the cast members, I think that she was the only one that was actually tolerable that I didn't mind, because I think that she really brought some funny stuff, especially her joke about the first joke, the joke she had about with it being a thumb or she had her pinker up and Randy Couture's he's like, is that supposed to be? Oh, it's a lot bigger than that, and he's like, no. It's actually supposed to be. It was something about that, but the jokes that she had with it, I thought was funny. And so she wasn't too bad, but she was She was the only cast member addition that I didn't mind. That was part of the new crew, and so there's more and more stuff that just really felt really disappointed with this, because I felt like with this being a franchise that was trying to go back to 80s and 90s action films. I kind of always thought it would be cool if they brought in some other new additions, I don't know, you could have got some, if you're going for new characters, you could have got somebody like Gerard Butler. You could have got, I don't know, if you wanted to really go after somebody, you get some people like Chris Hemsworth, Ryan Reynolds, or just some other new actors that are known for action films that are younger but can still do great stuff like that. Or if you wanted to still take the old school route where you're bringing more of the old school legends, hell, I would have loved to see, if he was younger, I would have loved to see, Clint Eastwood, John Travolta, guys like that would come in and stuff, because there's so much they could have done with this franchise. But unfortunately, it all boggles down to where this one feels like it's the most generic. It doesn't really add much to the actual franchise, and it just seems like it's so forgettable, to the point that if I end up owning it in the future, it's going to be just as part of the collection. And keep in mind that I was not a big fan of the third film, but even in that one, I at least saw that there was still potential with it. and this one too. So with that being said, this is going to be on one of my, possibly my dishonorable mentions, or maybe one of the worst, like very low on my list of the worst of the year. And so with that, I'm going to give the film a disaster grade on the Film Freaks meter. So for those of you who have also seen Expendables 4, let me know in the comments below what you thought about it, and also the other films. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next review. I'll see you later.